The room went quiet in a way that felt physical, like pressure against the eardrums. 22 people around a polished walnut table, screens glowing with quarterly projections, coffee cups cooling. The CEO leaned back in his chair and smiled at me like he'd already decided how this would end. "So let me get this straight," he said, tapping his pen against the table. "You're asking this company to pay you for 12 weeks while you're at home having a baby." A few nervous chuckles moved around the room. My palms were flat against the binder in front of me, the one with the revenue numbers I'd built myself. Before I could answer, he kept going. "We can't bankroll vacation for pregnant employees. And let's be honest," he added, louder now, turning his head so everyone could hear. "Pregnant women are dead weight. They slow teams down. They cost money. They're a liability." The word hung there. Dead weight. No one interrupted him. No one looked at me. That was the moment everything changed, even though I didn't say a word. 8 years earlier, I'd walked into Brightline Dynamics' downtown Austin office with a borrowed blazer and a notebook full of ideas. The company was small then, barely 50 people wedged into a converted warehouse near East 5th. I was 26, fresh off a messy divorce, supporting my younger sister through community college, and desperate for stability. Brightline offered a salary of $68,000, health insurance that kicked in after 30 days, and the promise that performance mattered more than pedigree. I delivered, over and over again. I built the client onboarding process that cut churn by 18%. I led the expansion into healthcare analytics, a vertical no one else wanted, that ended up generating $12.4 million in annual recurring revenue. For 3 consecutive years, my performance reviews used the same phrase: top 5% of contributors company-wide. My bonuses averaged $22,000 a year. My team grew from 2 analysts to 14. When Brightline went public, my stock options were modest compared to the executives, but they meant something. They meant security. They meant I could finally stop calculating grocery totals in my head. The CEO, Martin Hale, liked to talk about family values in town halls. He had 3 kids, all in private schools. He joked about missing soccer games because he was building something that mattered. People laughed. People admired him. He had that kind of presence, the kind that filled rooms and made others shrink just a little. When I found out I was pregnant at 34, it wasn't planned, but it wasn't a mistake. I was engaged to a civil engineer who worked long hours but showed up when it counted. We sat on the bathroom floor together, the test between us, both quiet with the weight of it. My first thought wasn't fear. It was logistics. Insurance, leave, the mortgage we'd just signed. Brightline's employee handbook was clear. 12 weeks of paid maternity leave at 100% salary for employees with more than 2 years of service. It was one of the policies HR bragged about during recruiting. I told my direct manager first. She hugged me and said we'd figure out coverage. I told HR next. They smiled, handed me a checklist, and told me to submit formal notice after the first trimester. I waited until week 13, then sent the email. 3 days later, an email landed in my inbox with the subject line, "Update to leave policy." It was from HR, copied to Martin. "Due to changing financial priorities," it read, "Brightline Dynamics will be modifying its paid leave benefits effective immediately. Maternity leave will transition to unpaid status, consistent with federal guidelines. No explanation, no acknowledgement of existing commitments, just a link to an updated handbook." I stared at the screen and did the math in my head. 12 weeks unpaid meant roughly $38,000 in lost income. It meant dipping into savings we'd earmarked for medical expenses. It meant stress I didn't need during a pregnancy that already came with elevated blood pressure warnings. I replied calmly, attaching the previous version of the handbook, highlighting the section on paid leave, and noting my 8 years of service. I asked whether existing employees would be grandfathered in. The response came an hour later. No exceptions. That was it. I requested a meeting. HR suggested we discuss it during the upcoming board review, since I was already scheduled to present my division's Q3 performance. That's how I ended up at that table, binder in front of me, heart pounding as Martin decided to turn a benefits dispute into a public spectacle. After he called me dead weight, someone cleared their throat. Someone else stared very hard at their laptop. I felt heat rise up my neck, but I kept my voice steady. "I'm not asking for anything outside company policy," I said. "I'm asking for the benefit I earned." Martin laughed, a sharp sound that cut through the room. "You earned it?" He leaned forward. "You're choosing to have a baby. That's a personal decision. The company shouldn't pay for your lifestyle choices." Then, softer, almost conversational, but somehow worse. "If you can't handle this job and a pregnancy, maybe it's time to step aside." That was the humiliation. Not just the words, but the way he said them, like he was doing everyone a favor by being honest. I finished my presentation. Revenue up 27%. Client satisfaction scores at an all-time high. No one clapped. When the meeting ended, Martin stood and walked out without looking at me. HR avoided my eyes. A board member I'd worked closely with for years gave me a tight smile and followed the others. I went back to my office, closed the door, and sat very still. What no one in that room knew was that Texas is a one-party consent state. What no one knew was that after the HR email, something in me had shifted from trust to caution. I'd started recording meetings where my employment terms were discussed. Not out of malice, out of self-preservation. The board meeting audio was clear. Every word, every laugh. That night, I didn't cry. I backed up the file to an encrypted drive, labeled it with the date, and wrote down exactly who was in the room. The next morning, HR called me in. They framed it as concern. They said Martin's comments were taken out of context. They suggested I consider an early transition plan for my own well-being. They mentioned, casually, that my role could be restructured while I was on leave. I nodded. I took notes. I asked for everything in writing. By the end of the week, my responsibilities were quietly redistributed. My calendar invites stopped coming. My access to certain dashboards was temporarily limited. That was when I called a lawyer. Her office was in a low-rise building off South Lamar, sunlight spilling through wide windows. She listened without interrupting as I laid out the timeline, sliding copies of emails across the table, my hands steady. When I finished, she leaned back and folded her arms. "Do you have proof of what he said?" she asked. I took out the drive. She listened to the recording once, then again, her expression hardening. "This isn't just a policy dispute," she said. "This is pregnancy discrimination, breach of contract, and hostile work environment." And he handed it to us. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't smile. She just started outlining options. EEOC complaint, demand letter, civil suit, injunctive relief to prevent retaliation. I asked what would happen to my job. She looked at me carefully. "I can't promise you'll want to stay there after this, but I can promise you won't be invisible." The demand letter went out 2 weeks later. It cited specific statutes. It attached transcripts. It requested immediate reinstatement of paid maternity leave, restoration of duties, and a formal investigation into Martin's conduct. Brightline's response was silence. Then, suddenly, urgency. I was placed on paid administrative leave pending review. The board scheduled an emergency session. External counsel was brought in. People who hadn't spoken to me in months started texting, asking how I was feeling. The turning point came during a follow-up board call, one Martin insisted on attending. My lawyer was there too, her voice calm over the speaker. Martin tried to control the narrative. He talked about financial pressures, about misinterpretations, about intent. When he finished, my lawyer spoke one sentence. "Before we proceed, you should know that we have a verbatim audio recording of the board meeting in which Mr. Hale referred to pregnant employees as dead weight, and we are prepared to submit it under oath." Silence. Not the awkward kind, the absolute kind. The kind where you can hear someone swallow on the other end of the line. The call ended shortly after. Within a week, Martin was placed on indefinite leave by the board. An internal investigation expanded beyond my case, uncovering a pattern of discriminatory remarks and retaliatory actions that had been buried under NDAs and quiet exits. Brightline reinstated my paid maternity leave, retroactive. They restored my role on paper, though by then it was clear the company itself was changing. The board announced a comprehensive review of HR practices. A new parental leave policy was drafted, expanding benefits for all caregivers, not just mothers. The settlement came months later. It included compensation, but more importantly, it included accountability. Martin resigned, not quietly. The board's statement cited conduct inconsistent with company values. I didn't return after my leave ended. I didn't need to. I testified. I consulted on policy reform. I joined a nonprofit that advocated for workplace protections for pregnant employees, helping others navigate systems that had nearly crushed me. The day I held my daughter for the first time, the weight I felt wasn't fear anymore. It was resolve. Power doesn't always look like shouting back in the moment. Sometimes it looks like staying calm, documenting everything, and choosing the right moment to speak. If you've ever been made to feel disposable at work for being human, remember this. Dignity is not a perk. It's a right. Tell me where you're watching from. Share your story. Someone out there needs to hear it.